Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from around the world for the latest edition of QTalks, an online on-demand series of conversations all around the future of water, powered by KTM. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water, and I'll be your host not only for the next 30 minutes, but in fact for the next hour, because this is a two-part series really focusing on the changing role of the operator. And I think when I look at the series of conversations we've had on QTalks, we've looked at really high-level topics, cybersecurity, the potential of digital twins, water security and safety. But the question is, what does this actually mean to utilities on the ground that are at the front line facing the impacts of climate change? So we've got some amazing speakers for you today. We are bridging across the Atlantic from North America through to the UK, through to Netherlands, with some fantastic viewpoints to hear from. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to our speakers, and then we'll go around everyone just to kind of say a bit of background about their organisation, the scale, so you get a feel of their expertise as well. So I'm pleased to introduce Dulke Schippers, who is the leading professional from Wittens, which is the largest drinking water utility in the Netherlands. Welcome, Dulke.
Thank you.
We also have Jouke Koenig. It's a program manager also from Wittens, so it's like a double show, if you like, from Dulke and Jouke. And I'm pretty sure I've got the names right there. We also have Audley Findley, who's a water superintendent for Greenville, Indiana, from the US, which is a water off-taker and provider, not involved in the treatment, so it really complements Wittens really well. And last but not least, we have Chris Sonowski, who's the CEO of WaterClick, who's really got this unique position, kind of matching innovations and digital solutions through to utilities in the US and beyond. So welcome, Dulke, Jouke, Audley and Chris to the next QTalks. So to get going, let's do a real quick kind of roundtable of introductions. If we can hear from the guys at Wittens, just for people watching, Wittens is kind of a household name, I think, when it comes to one of the leading utilities of the world. But give us a bit of context on the size, scale that we're dealing with here in your roles as well.
Okay, shall I start, Jouke? Then you can fill in the end. Well, Wittens is the largest drinking water company in the Netherlands, as you said, Tom. So it's one third of the Netherlands, providing approximately 6 million people with clean drinking water every day. So that's our goal. So we are extracting the water, producing it, treating it, and bringing it to the customer. That's our role. And my role is, I've been working there for 24 years now in different roles, starting as process engineer, been manager of the innovation department, manager of the investment department, and manager of the production department. And now I'm leading professional in the role to see into 2100. What will we face? What kind of problems do we face in 2100? And what will be the solutions? Because that's also a very important thing, I guess. And this one fits in quite well. So that's a little bit my background and the background of Wittens. But I think clearly Jouke can comment a little bit further on that.
Yeah, thank you, Dulke. I'm Jouke Koenig. I'm Program Manager Infra 2025 within Wittens, so this is a shorter horizon. But we are facing already some problems, not only in 2100. The problems we are now seeing is that quite some employees are retiring and they're taking a lot of knowledge with them. So we are looking to catch this knowledge in systems, in programs. So we have within the program several projects and there are quite some digital twins where we are building tools to help the new employees to do the same job as the elder one did.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Well, interesting to hear about the experience as well as looking 3 years ahead, as well as all the way to 2100 and hearing of the background from investment to innovation as well. So, yeah, we'll definitely bring that into the conversation. Great stuff. Audi, yourself, give us a bit of background on the kind of size of the operation and your role within it, please.
Yeah, so, it's an interesting juxtaposition between us and Wittens, not just being across the pond, but also the scale of what we do. We're a rural water utility here in Indiana, and we serve a population of about 4,900 people. We've got connections of around 2,000. So we're very, very, a smaller size scale of operations. We don't do any treatment, as you mentioned in the introduction. We purchase water from other providers, but we coordinate with them. I do also provide operation services to another local utility where I personally help with the treatment operations and run their plant. But overall, we are dealing with a lot of the same problems that every other utility, whether we're big or small. We all deal with the same type of issues that our guests were mentioning. So it'll be an interesting discussion to see how they're dealing with things and how we can learn from them as well.
Very good, great stuff, Ali. And I think you're right. It's a nice kind of contrast between the two, not only geographically but size. But as you mentioned, everyone is facing this kind of perfect storm of events that we're going to go into when it comes to the challenges. Chris from WaterClick, in terms of your role, because you're the way I see you guys, you're really interested in this kind of middle ground between the utilities and between the entrepreneurs and the startups to try and make that right solution to the right problem. Oh, Chris, sorry, you're muted.
I'm so sorry, rookie mistake.
No problem, there we go.
I just said thanks for having me on, and I just want to remind Audie that his utility is actually larger than 90% of the utilities in the US. So we have a very interesting vantage point in that, the US utility space is very kind of somewhat fragmented. And we see that there is a lot of innovation out there and available for a lot of these utilities, but they don't have access to it because the traditional route for a larger utility is to mitigate the risk of selection with a consultant. And that doesn't work at scale. So we're certainly not a consultant in trying to act in that space, but we see that there's a lot of utilities that need the technology. And by the way, we serve large utilities too, but it's just by the number of utilities we end up, the size of the utility we end up serving is quite small. So over 90% of the utilities in the US serve less than 10,000 people. So yeah, we're sort of a matchmaker, and we try to get people a journey to know where to start. So a lot of times they're paralyzed with, indecision. And so we try to help them make that easy for them.
Great stuff. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of point to make, that actually there's tens of thousands of utilities in the pretty fragmented US market. And often there are some great cases of adoption of innovation, but they're perhaps not even talked about or even mentioned because you've got the big profile, bigger city utilities that have the press and communication department that are talking about it, or even someone involved in sort of international speaking. So yeah, it'd be great to kind of get some cases from you later on. Good stuff. Well, thank you to everyone on the panel. As you can see, we've got some super qualified speakers to give us some good viewpoints over the next hour. So for the first part, we're going to drill into some of the kind of day-to-day challenges before, as I mentioned in part two, actually looking and kind of unpicking the conversation around innovation internally within utilities and kind of overcoming culture change. So Duka, you mentioned then around population growth, and you're looking ahead to 2100, which is quite frightening, actually, to see what the world, given the recent headlines, particularly from my country, the UK, of what's happened in 6 months. Heaven knows what's going to happen by 2100. But you've mentioned, I think, in a previous call that your population is going to go from about 5.8 million to 6 million in quite a short space of time. So an extra 200,000 people are going to need access to your services. So what does that actually translate to internally in terms of infrastructure investment? Can you talk us through that, please?
Indeed, we have. It's indeed we see a steep increase in the population in the Netherlands. If it's immigration or people moving through the country, that's a huge problem for us, because if you're looking at the way we invest normally in the Netherlands, we are looking for groundwater wells, and it takes 15 years from the groundwater well to become, in the end, a treatment plant and go to the customer. And 15 years is a lot of time. And when we look at 2018 was for us a game changer. At that time, we saw the water going up from water demand going up from normally to 20% more in just 3 months. And it was amazing, because the summers in the Netherlands changed rapidly. Because we have summers now up to 40 degrees. Also in the UK, you have very hot summers now. So that's very strange. And you see that the way the consumer is behaving is changing a lot. So that's also one of the things. So migration, so more people coming into our area, but also the behavior of the customer is changing, and that's quite difficult because that means we have to be much more adaptive to the change externally. And when we look internally, we're not accustomed to that because it takes too long for us to get projects through the provinces, to the local government, to our company. It takes 15 years, and we have to adapt every month, every year. So that's quite a difficult challenge for us to face. So it's externally, but also internally, we have to change a lot due to these climate changes and also other changes at consumers. Yeah.
So 15 years to go from essentially tapping a new source to actually to the receiving household. So obviously there's perhaps you've got the political side of this, you've got the governmental side, the investment side is quite complicated nature to essentially half that time frame, right? But how big a part, you mentioned the changing behavior of consumers, how big a kind of part is reducing water consumption and encouraging people to kind of reduce their own water footprint? Is that's got to factor into the long-term play of Vitens as well, right?
Of course it is, because but it takes a while, because we are now investing in new homes to put in some installation to reduce the water usage by 50%. So reusing the shower water, reusing the dishwasher water to toilet water. So that saves up to 50% of our demand. But our installed base are 2.3 million houses within our area. And those houses are not new. So if you have to invest in all of those houses to change that, it's quite difficult. So looking at small things like collecting rainwater and using it for your garden, it's okay. But if it does not rain, and it mostly doesn't from May until September, then you can have a collection system. But if there's no rain, then you cannot use it. So it's quite difficult. So it takes a while to really change that consumption, because in the Netherlands we started at up to 200 liters per person a day, up till 120 liters per person a day nowadays, but we see it going up. So there's a little bit of a change in the behavior of the consumers. It also has to do with the households. Normally we had decades ago we had a father and a mother and 3 children, and nowadays we have separated households. We have people living alone. We have so that's also a very important thing for us to see a steep rise in our consumption. So hopefully the consumer behavior, we can do a little bit in it, but it's more or less 5%. That's the max we can do at this time.
It's interesting to hear that you said you've got it down to 120 litres
120
per person per day, right? And I remember looking at the 50-litre home concept within a new build of having every single appliance and internal reuse. But actually, as you mentioned, there's quite a lot of millions of existing houses already built where it's just not possible to kind of implement that. But Jouke, then from your side, because you're looking less around 2100 actually within 3 years' time. So what's the kind of your top of your agenda when you actually look at the work that you've got to do in terms of helping to reorganize people, processes, politics internally to help meet that challenge?
Yeah, well, as said in the introduction, we are building several digital twins to capture the knowledge that the elder employees have. You can wake them in the middle of the night and they can just give you the answer to a problem. When there is a burst outside, they can tell you which valve to close or open to get the customer give water again. Or when they come into a production plant, they can hear if the pump is working in the correct way or not. And the younger generation who starts working with us, they will come, do their job, and then hop on in about 5 years or so. And maybe they will find another job within Vitens, but maybe they will also leave Vitens. So we are building some digital tools to help them make the right decisions. We have one on the production plant that's about the quality of the water. We developed this completely ourselves. It's called SLIM. And this is real time. We know the water quality we deliver to the customers real time always. So we are not dependent on the grab samples from the laboratory and just once a week we know what quality we deliver. But we can always see if the production plant is behaving as it should be. Mm-hmm. And within Slim, we added some other stuff as well. So we are looking at permits, how much groundwater we can extract from the ground. We look at the production loss. So we are extending it. And we are building a digital twin on the distribution area. So this is to see how much water is in the system, what the pressure is, if there's enough water for every customer. And you can also try things before you do it in real time. So if there's a burst and you say, I want to close this valve, in this system, you can already see and try what the effect will be before doing it in real life outside. Yeah, so you can use it for training as well.
So testing in a safe environment. Yeah. So obviously you've got this sort of dual-pronged challenge where you're having to provide more water for the growing population, but at the same time you mentioned a lot of your highly skilled senior engineers are also leaving the business. Yeah. So the digital twin as a concept beyond the plant, but actually on the network to help with that knowledge transfer is going to be incredibly important moving forward. Great stuff. Thank you, guys. Well, Audie, that's a nice little segue to yourself then on the network. Have you looked into the forecast data on the population growth? And actually, you mentioned there you've got 2,000 connections. How that's going to play out? I mean, are you looking to 2,100 as well, or is that's quite a long way in advance, right?
Well, I definitely applaud the forward thinking and looking that far forward. Being a small utility, we obviously reflect that in our staff, and so you're looking at 20% of the staff here at Greenville right now. There's 5 of us here, and so we rely upon the staff that we have as well as the partnerships that we've had to kind of have some of those forward-looking mentalities. And it is difficult when you have a staff that small to be able to kind of make some of those predictions and to look ahead. Honestly, our biggest focus right now is, making sure that we're using the resources that we have effectively each and every day. We've made some good progress when it comes to looking at conservation and water loss. I've always found that to be kind of an interesting kind of mindset. We want to preach conservation because water is a precious resource, and that's absolutely the case. And yet we sell water, and that's how we pay for the infrastructure developments that we have. And so it puts yourself kind of as your own worst enemy, as well as your best friend at the same time. And so, but I think we have to make that case of using the resource in the most responsible way. For us right now, as opposed to looking too far ahead, we're restricted somewhat by getting rid of the water. We can't develop in our area more homes, or very many more homes outside of our capacity until we can figure out a way to get rid of the water, until we can to deal with the wastewater side of things. That's a different discussion. But we're limited by that development as well. So what we do is we look at keeping the water where it's supposed to go. We buy 100,000 gallons or whatever. We want to make sure that as much of that can get to the customers as possible. So trying to use that new technology, making those partnerships to just use what we have today while still trying to look a few years ahead to make sure that we're making good choices for the next generation.
I think it's interesting when you say you're looking at 20% of the staff right here, right? Because you have to be a kind of jack of all trades, but a master of all as well, right? So run me through your kind of data, because the entire title of this session is the changing role of the operator, right? And actually you're doing so many different things as part of the business and your teamwork. So I'd love to hear kind of every single almost job and role that you have under your remit, Audie, very quickly to get a sense of perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So we have one full time operator out in the field, and we have two part time staff. We have two gals in the office, and my job every day is to make sure that we're using our field staff effectively. We outline our day. Every day for me, we have some interesting technology. We've partnered with Camstrip meter technology out of Denmark. They have an acoustic listening device meter that we've run a pilot program with. So one of my first things to do is I come in, I look at that data to see if there's anything out there that's causing a problem that maybe we need to go inspect. And from there we just kind of make sure we're using our time effectively. But part of our discussion, looking at the topics for today was the emerging contaminants and things along those lines. So we really have to put a lot of different hats on through the day. Yesterday I was in an EPA webinar about the emerging contaminant of PFAS and PFOS, and what's going to be required of the operator next year, because their EPA is going to come out with their next regulation when it comes to how to deal with that contaminant, as well as all of the different emerging what's the right word for it, the emerging requirements that come along with our job. They've added quite a few levels to what was required just 5 years ago to what we have to do. So trying to wrap your arms around that every single day to make sure that the flock doesn't get away from you does create quite an interesting situation.
Yeah, well, I guess it's keeping up to date with the latest regulation and what that's required of you as kind of running a small utility. Well, the topic of sort of PFAS and water quality, I know both yourself and Jarko have tapped on, and we'll come on to next. But Chris, from your point of view, the kind of, as you mentioned, the fragmented market then, and this macro problem that we keep hearing about in terms of population growth and increasing capacity. How do you see it when you're speaking to companies with innovations, ideally kind of looking to sell and get into utilities? Is this an advantage or more of a challenge for them?
Well, I think challenges are opportunities, right? So that's most innovators out there see challenges as opportunities. I think the kind of the message to the other companies that are looking to innovate is make sure you understand the problem in the market that you're serving before you develop your solution. That's a better way to make money. A lot of innovators and entrepreneurs go into their endeavors hoping to make money out of it. But I see, unfortunately, a lot of companies with solutions that are looking for a problem. And it's much better when working with smaller utilities to help define the problem better before you go after a solution. But I think one of the encouraging messages I want to get out too is that, I think there are a lot of people like Audi, not quite like Audi, but there are a lot of people out there that are serving these smaller and medium-sized utilities. They're actually doing a very good job. I mean, they want to be good stewards. I mean, Audi, I don't think you said the word steward, but you said limited resources, care for it in a right way. So I think as we look at population growth in the States here too, I think most of the people recognize a call to be a good steward. So I think that's encouraging, that people are trying to do it. And I think most of the people going into providing technologies are trying to help them steward the resources. I think the challenge is the cost to value of stewardship, right? So whether you're looking at a giant problem like decarbonization or climate change, or you're looking at a very small practical problem like getting what's in Audi's head into one of his younger field staff's head before Audi hangs up his cleats and leaves the locker room. I think those are all good, unique challenges that I think that will help operators steward well.
So, Chris, great, thanks. And I agree. I think seeing kind of utilities as stewards of the community, as kind of stewards of water and this critical resource is really important as well. So it's interesting to see the difference in size, but also that commonality between Vitens and yourself, Audi. So let's move very quickly on then to water quality, because Audi, you mentioned about PFAS. I know Vitens, Dulka, this is something that as a whole, as a utility, as a country, the Netherlands is keeping a sort of keen eye on this topic as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, we have, of course, different companies within the Netherlands, surface water treatment companies, and we are a groundwater treatment, have a groundwater treatment system. But also within the wells we found traces of PFAS. So it's quite worrying that these kind of stuff nowadays come also into our wells. But also the surface water companies have a lot of problems removing it. So we have a lot of problems with the Belgian guys bringing the PFAS into we call it the Westerschelde, coming to our side. And yeah, in the end, we are at the end of the pipe. You are the delta, the Dutch delta we are. So all the stuff from all our neighbors, and we like our neighbors, that's not a problem, but all the stuff is coming to our country. So in the end, we are end of pipe. Yeah, we have problems with PFAS and all kinds of other stuff, but PFAS is nowadays very important component. So, and yeah, how to remove it, because it makes the treatment system again a little bit more complicated. Because yeah, of course, you can remove it. You can remove it with membrane filtration or ion exchange or active carbon. There's no problem. You can remove it, but it's still a further step ahead. So again, the guys working on the treatment systems again have to learn new things. And in the end, for us, it's quite interesting, because if we want to remove the PFAS, for instance, what do you do with the concentrate or with the waste? We cannot get rid of it. So it's quite a huge challenge. So I think the PFAS is globally a very, now not an interesting component, but very disturbing component at this time. Yeah, correct.
Well, it's called kind of forever chemicals for a reason, right? Because you mentioned if you're still filtering it out, it's still essentially in that membrane, and unless you're looking at absolute destruction, you're just shifting it from one place to another. So, in fact, the next QTalks we have is going to be on PFAS as a kind of contamination, and we have KWR from the Netherlands who've done some in-depth research into this to go into it a bit more, but. Yauke, then, from your side, because you mentioned about digital twinning beyond the plant, the network, what's the connection between the two and PFAS, and actually looking at, you mentioned that keyword real time, in terms of contaminants in the environment and how much information that people are aware of. Tell me about how you're seeing these kind of dots being connected.
Well, I guess that about the PFAS topic, it's not a big connection right now, because as Duke said, most of our treatments, most of our wells, we don't find it. So for lots of the operators, it's not on top of their mind.
Okay. Well, I guess as you mentioned, there's only a small amount of wells where there's trace elements. So, but in terms of, you mentioned about having that real time. How important is that when it comes to water quality then?
Well, that's becoming much more important than it was in the past, because we want to be able to tell our customers if we have a problem and what the problem is. Because in the past, when we found out that there was something wrong, it was already consumed, because it was a couple of days later. So when it's real time, then you can act on it. You can, maybe when the hardness is a bit higher, you can tell the customers that they are getting a different water quality, or you can act on your production plants to make it right again, much faster, much sooner than we could in the past.
Thank you, Yauke. So, Audie, you mentioned there around actually going into sort of EPA meetings and updates, and obviously PFAS is a huge topic in the US. There's examples of kind of utilities being ahead of the curve and actually doing their own kind of activated carbon trials and testing and preempting the regulation. Talk me through how you see it from an off-taker point of view, because obviously you haven't got the water sources in terms of the groundwater and treating it, but obviously, how do you see this as a kind of mega challenge down the pike?
That's an excellent question. It was kind of going through my mind yesterday, just as I was, literally listening, going through that webinar, because we don't do any treatment, and so we have to rely upon our providers to be up to date. But but I think we have to be a responsible consumer, and as part of that, making good decisions for our customers. And looking through we kind of talk about, what different hats do we have to wear. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. Reading through the list of potential treatment options and the different types of PFAS and PFOS. I mean, there's, according to the information, there's 1,000 or so of them. What ones are most important? Which ones do we need to pay the most attention to? And I think there's kind of a balance between trying to be educated about those things, but also not being carried away by the message behind it. Being responsible, again, as Chris mentioned earlier, about being responsible stewards. So be taking careful steps before we end up getting caught up in the wave of concern about it, to make sure that we're placing our feet properly. Because right now we don't have any specific direction. So being an off-taker of water, we can't do much, but we can be educated. And so trying to make sure that we're making the right decisions to be educated, so that when those discussions come up and how they affect us, we are reacting properly, and partnering with our suppliers to make sure that we're making good decisions for our consumers.
Well, naturally, your consumers will look to you as, and to use that word, steward again. So it's important that even when there's a bit of uncertainty from a kind of state, federal regulation point of view, and it's regardless of that, you still need to have the right information to present to any questions that may come up, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to answer the question when one of your consumers comes up, and again, admittedly, we're a small population, and I don't know how much information is out there, how much our particular customer base is concerned about this. But even one person who has the question, I have to be willing to say, maybe I don't know, but I will get back to you, because we have to be able to present the confidence in the water supply, in what we're doing for a community. We're really a community resource, not a business.
And ultimately, a tight-knit community will talk, right? So if you give them a confident answer with the right information, that will spread positively around that, that you guys are presenting the correct information. Chris.
That's the hope.
Chris, let's sort of, if you can, kind of conclude then the part one on how you see this water quality, PFAS, and that phrase that Yuka mentioned about the need for real-time information on water quality. There's a lot of solutions now sort of entering this space, right? And we've seen it as well. I mean, as a kind of industry journalist, a lot of companies get in touch when they promise the next best thing in this kind of water quality monitoring space. So how do you kind of see it, and actually what is needed sort of right now?
Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities for smart companies to do good things. But again, I always try to be helpful in my comments. And I think that there's help on the government side, and that let's hope that that utilities are willing to take, I'll use the word, a little bit more risk as they look at innovation. Because one of the things that PFAS is going to do in the US, whenever the regulations hit hard, is it's going to force utilities to do something. And when you're faced with a choice of risks, you have to put them in order. Which is more risky? That we don't do anything, that we hope the PFAS doesn't come up another part per trillion where we're going to be regulated. Mm-hmm. So I think that the hope is that we can meet the need for innovation in risk by offering something that's incremental to utilities. I think that the risk a lot of times in water is that making a small change in treatment costs a lot of money, and there aren't a lot of treatment plants in the US that are prepared to do anything for PFAS. So I think the hope is that innovative companies can offer a low risk, small step to take to help. And I'm jealous of the technology in the Netherlands that you guys have, where you have digital twins that, sure, you've tried it, but I won't ask, for the sake of my American friends, how much you had to pay for that, because you're a big utility. You can afford the research and de-risking it without investing a lot. So I think the hope is, as we look at whether it be PFAS or whatever's next, by the way, mm-hmm. that we're able to find companies that have a journey that starts with something low risk. I mean, you look at the hope for a freemium offering, meaning like a free offering at first, get started, or something that is much lower risk for a utility. They don't have to spend a lot of money, and then they use that technology. You look at the potential for piloting. Can we make that lower cost? Can we make that smaller, compartmentalized? Can we figure out how to do something like franchise small treatment systems? There's lots of different ways to look at water quality problems and de-risk it, because I think that the fear of failure in a small or even a large utility usually outweighs their willingness to take on risk. And so if we can figure out to help them fear less, do a little bit, and then fear a little bit less, do a little bit more, I think everyone hopefully would be happier.
Well said, Chris. Yeah, I think ultimately, regulation will force and drive change, but it may also force a need for kind of innovative business models beyond the solution itself, right? As you mentioned, there's quite a lot of talk about data or software as a service, but actually treatment as a service to make it more palatable as a capital expenditure to the smaller companies is going to be absolutely essential. Well,
I think, may I add something?
Okay,
yeah. Because what you say is so true, Chris, that we have 1,400 employees, and when I hear you have 5, we have already 5 data scientists, I believe. So we are able to do things that is just not possible for you. Well, we think we should share what we discover. So we are going to some Swan conference, or etc., for example, and share what we discovered. And we are also putting stuff on GitHub. We have a dynamic bandwidth monitor that's for free for everybody to use. You can get it for free from GitHub. So I think all the utilities in the world should help each other. And we are lucky that we are so big that we can build our own stuff, but we don't want to keep it for ourselves.
Well, Joke, that's a fantastic way and a nice line that all utilities around the world should help themselves. I think that's a great way to kind of conclude part 1 of this discussion. We've touched upon some interesting challenges around population growth, aging infrastructure, and as well as on the water quality side of PFAS. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and make sure you check out part 2, where we're going to go into more of the discussion on people and behavioural change.